Okay, here's something that sounds completely impossible. How can having way too much of a hormone cause the exact same problems as having way too little of it?
Right. It makes no sense on the surface.
We're talking about cortisol here. That hormone your body pumps out for stress, for danger.
Flight one.
Exactly. But think about this symptom list. Fatigue, inflammation, blood sugar going haywire, maybe even that stubborn belly fat.
Uh-huh.
The signals your body sends can apparently look identical whether your cortisol is through the roof or totally tanked. How?
It feels completely upside down, doesn't it? Like your body's using the same alarm bell for opposite situations.
Precisely. So that's what we're diving into today. We're going to unpack this confusing paradox using the material we've got.
Yeah, let's try and figure out what's really going on behind these symptoms that seem so contradictory.
Our mission, basically, is to cut through that confusion, look at the info we have, and understand the process, not just stare at this baffling list.
Agreed. Let's get to the root of it.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. What is cortisol, really? The material frames it as, well, the stress hormone.
Primarily, yes. Built for those intense moments, helping your body gear up for action, adapt to stress or danger.
That's the part most people know, right? The adrenaline rush feeling.
Yeah, the immediate response. But the sources, they remind us cortisol has these other, really critical everyday jobs, too. Stuff that's important even when you're not, running from a tiger.
Okay, like what?
Well, it's huge for controlling your immune system response. It's actually a powerful anti-inflammatory, naturally. And it plays a big role in regulating blood sugar.
Ah, okay. And I guess those are the very things that go sideways when the cortisol levels are off.
That seems to be the connection. It leads us right back to that confusing symptom list we started with.
Because when you look at the symptoms, the material highlights for both high and low cortisol states, you get stuff like, what was it, fatigue?
Fatigue, yeah, big one.
Check. Inflammation.
Yes, inflammation pops up for both.
Problems with blood sugar.
Keeping it stable becomes an issue.
Which often shows up as sugar cravings, too. The source mentioned that, right?
Absolutely, that's in there. Then there's high blood pressure, high cholesterol.
And the one everyone seems to focus on, that belly fat that just won't budge.
It's a striking overlap, really.
It really is. Seriously, how can one hormone, whether it's working overtime or barely showing up, make you feel the exact same set of crummy symptoms? It just feels like a biological riddle.
And it is a riddle if you only look at those symptoms on the surface. But the material does give us a little distinction, a hint about what might be going on underneath.
Okay, so there's some difference suggested. How does the source material try to tease them apart, even slightly?
Well, the nuance it points to is about chronicity. It suggests that low cortisol symptoms, in the specific way the source is talking about it, often link up with more chronic, really long-term states.
Like what kind of states?
Think chronic burnout, real deep exhaustion, or chronic fatigue syndrome, even ongoing inflammatory conditions like fibromyalgia that generalized body pain.
Ah, so it's not just feeling tired today. It's like a persistent, dragging fatigue that doesn't let up.
Exactly. That seems to be the picture painted for the low side in this context. Now, the high cortisol state in this comparison is presented as maybe being a bit more short-term or perhaps earlier in the whole process.
Earlier in the process. What does that mean?
Well, the sources are clear that it's the prolonged high cortisol that eventually leads to the low state symptoms, the burnout. So someone with high cortisol might have those symptoms, fatigue, inflammation, but maybe they haven't hit that total system exhaustion point yet.
So they might still have some energy sometimes, unlike the really chronic fatigue.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
Bursts of energy mixed with crashes, maybe. It's a subtle distinction based on the presentation.
Okay, that adds a layer, but honestly, if you're feeling exhausted and inflamed and your blood sugar's all over the place, just knowing that difference still leaves you guessing, right?
Yeah.
It's still super hard to tell just from how you feel.
That's the absolute core of the problem, yes. And that's why getting beyond the symptoms to the mechanism, the process connecting these dots, is so crucial. Symptoms are the what, the mechanism is the why.
Right, and before we get to that main mechanism, the source does mention, just briefly, a different kind of low cortisol thing, doesn't it? Something separate from this high then low burnout picture.
It does, yeah. A quick mention of Addison's disease. This is where the body genuinely doesn't produce enough cortisol, often right from the start.
And that's different how?
The material says it's often autoimmune, the body attacking its own adrenal glands. And because cortisol helps regulate immunity, in Addison's you often see very low immunity. The symptoms are also quite distinct. often major weight loss, being very thin, maybe skin changes like vitiligo, which is loss of pigment, or sometimes, paradoxically, patches of darker skin.
Okay, so that's a specific disease state. And the source is clear. It's not what we're focusing on with this symptom overlap puzzle.
Exactly. It explicitly says the focus here is on the situation where chronic high cortisol eventually causes symptoms that mimic low cortisol, not a primary gland failure like Addison's. That distinction is key because it points towards a functional issue, not necessarily a production issue initially.
Got it. Okay, this is where it started to click for me going through the material. The big idea that bridges this gap, according to the sources, is something called cortisol resistance.
Bingo. That's the linchpin. It's maybe less famous than insulin resistance, but the concept is similar, and it unlocks this whole mystery of the shared symptoms.
So walk us through it. How does the source material explain this resistance happening?
Okay, so imagine your cells have these little docking stations, receptors, waiting for the cortisol message. Now, if you've got chronically high cortisol floating around, maybe from all that modern stress we mentioned, the source describes it like that high cortisol is constantly knocking on the door, constantly trying to deliver its message, essentially jamming the lines.
Like someone just yelling nonstop outside your window. Eventually, you tune it out.
Exactly like that. Your body is smart. It recognizes this constant high signaling isn't good long term. So it adapts. It starts to protect itself by making those receptors less receptive, less sensitive. It downgrades them.
Okay.
The technical term the source throws out is glucocorticoid receptor resistance.
Glucocorticoid receptor resistance. Fancy term for tuning out the yelling. So the cells just aren't listening as well anymore.
Precisely. So now you can still have high levels of cortisol circulating in your blood. The yelling outside the window is still loud, but because those receptors on the cell surface are resistant, the message isn't getting inside the cell properly.
So the cell itself is acting like it's not getting enough cortisol signal, even though there's tons of it around.
You got it. The cell is effectively starving for the cortisol signal internally, despite the abundance outside. It's like wearing earplugs while someone shouts the sound is there, but it's not registering effectively.
And that lack of signal inside the cell, that's what triggers the problems we listed. The fatigue, the inflammation.
That's the key connection. Remember those beneficial jobs of cortisol, anti-inflammatory effects, immune control, blood sugar stuff. All that relies on the signal getting inside the cell and telling it what to do.
Right.
When the cell is resistant, it doesn't get those instructions properly. So you lose the anti-inflammatory benefit. Boom, inflammation flares up. The immune system might get dysregulated. Blood sugar management goes haywire.
Wow. And what about the body's overall feedback loop? The system trying to manage cortisol levels, does that get messed up too?
It absolutely does. The body usually senses the effect of cortisol, which happens inside the cell. If the feedback system detects that the internal signal is weak because of the resistance, it thinks, oh no, we need more cortisol.
So it tells the adrenals to make even more.
Exactly. It's like telling the person outside your window to shout even louder because you've put earplugs in. It just compounds the problem.
Okay, that paints a clear picture. So you end up in this state where you might have technically high cortisol floating around, but your body, at the cellular level, is acting like it's low on cortisol because it just can't hear the signal properly.
That's the paradox solved by the resistance mechanism. You get the symptoms of ineffective cortisol signaling the inflammation, the immune issues, the blood sugar problems, the fatigue, even if the hormone level itself is high.
And that explains the symptom overlap and how someone could go from feeling maybe wired and stressed, high cortisol, to eventually feeling totally burnt out and inflamed as that resistance develops over time.
Precisely. It maps out that transition.
So let's connect back. What's the main thing driving this whole cascade? What pushes the system from maybe just high stress into this resistance and burnout phase?
The source material points overwhelmingly to one thing: chronic stress.
Just stress in general.
Specifically, it emphasizes modern mental and emotional stress. Our bodies, they evolve for short, sharp bursts of stress, run from the predator, threat over, relax.
Right. Fight or flight, then recovery.
Exactly. They haven't really adapted well to the kind of relentless, low-grade, ongoing stress many of us experience today. Work deadlines, financial worries, constant news, social media pressure, that kind of stuff.
So it's the nonstop nature of it, the lack of recovery time, that really wears down the system and leads to this resistance.
That's the argument presented. It's that sustained pressure keeping cortisol high that forces the cells into that adaptive but ultimately problematic resistance state.
Okay, so if we accept this picture from the material chronic stress leading to resistance, causing these overlapping symptoms, What does the source suggest might actually help someone dealing with this kind of situation?
Well, based purely on what's in the material, the focus is very much on lifestyle changes. Things aimed squarely at reducing that chronic stress load.
Makes sense. Like what specifically?
Things like consciously breaking up your day, not just grinding through. Taking actual breaks, maybe long walks. Getting away from screens, reducing computer time, spending more time in nature is mentioned.
Kind of dialing back the modern intensity?
Yeah, and also reducing stimulants like caffeine, which can further drive that stress response. Basically trying to build back in those periods of calm and recovery that our systems expect.
Okay. Does the source mention anything else, maybe different approaches depending on where someone is in that high-low spectrum?
It does touch on that, yeah. Again, just reporting impartially here, it discusses different types of general support approaches. It contrasts strategies described for supporting the low cortisol or chronic inflammatory picture.
The burnout, fatigue, maybe autoimmune stuff.
Right. It links that profile to tiredness, low tolerance or patience, potential skin issues, allergies, that sort of thing. It contrasts that with approaches described for supporting high cortisol, which it presents as maybe more common for people who haven't necessarily tipped into chronic inflammation yet, who might still have some energy, even if it's fluctuating.
So different potential support avenues mentioned, depending on the overall pattern.
That's what the material lays out, yes.
Yeah.
Different descriptions of support strategies discussed in the source.
Okay, let's try and wrap our heads around this whole thing then. It starts off incredibly confusing because you see that same list, fatigue, inflammation, blood sugar issues popping up for what seem like opposite problems, high and low cortisol.
The overlap is undeniable and, yeah, initially very confusing. But the key insight we've pulled from this material is this idea of cortisol resistance driven by chronic stress.
It's not just about the level of cortisol, but whether your cells can actually listen to it.
Exactly. Chronic stress makes the cells tune out the signal. So even if cortisol is high outside the cell...
Inside the cell, it's like it's low. The message isn't getting through.
Right, and that's why you lose those benefits. The anti-inflammatory action, the immune balance, inflammation takes hold, blood sugar gets wonky, fatigue sets in. It explains why the symptoms look so similar.
And it really highlights why that chronic, unrelenting stress is so damaging over time. It's fundamentally disrupting how your cells respond to one of your body's most crucial hormones, is breaking that communication line.
Understanding resistance really is the key piece that makes the paradox make sense. It connects high stress exposure to low functioning symptoms.
So here's a thought to leave you with. How many of those really common, maybe vague symptoms people experience today, that persistent fatigue, the inflammation that seems to come from nowhere, those blood sugar swings, how much of that might actually be rooted in this complex dance between chronic stress and hormone resistance?
It's kind of a hidden cost, perhaps, of our modern, constantly stressed lives, as suggested by the material we looked at.
We really hope this deep dive into the confusing world of cortisol symptoms, and especially this idea of resistance, has been helpful for you. Maybe shed some light.
Yeah, hopefully it clarified things a bit.
And hey, if you found this interesting and valuable, if it made you think, please do us a quick favor. Take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel.
It really helps get this information out to more people who might be wondering about these same things.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.